Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to our first lecture of the 2020 COVI Lecture Series. I'm Debbie Ingalls. I'm the Director of COVI here at Brock University. We have a wonderful roster of speakers this year that are scheduled to share their information with us, with the industry, to further grow our industry. And we're spanning topics throughout the entire grape and wine value chain, right through from some basics of viticulture through to export markets and what we need to do to export our wines. So it's my privilege today to introduce COVI Professional Affiliate, Janet Dorozynski, this afternoon. Janet's a former academic who left academia to work in and with the international and Canadian wine industry through a government agency known as Global Affairs. And you're going to hear lots more about that this afternoon. So for over 20 years, she's worked in various capacities in export and international business development, education, marketing, and media, as well as public relations. Janet is the Trade Commissioner for Canadian Wine, Beer, and Spirits at Global Affairs Canada. And this is the federal government department that leads on export development, promotion, and investment attractions for Canada. She is a WSET certified educator. I didn't know this, but she holds the WSET diploma, which is the highest rank in the WSET levels. She's been tasting, reviewing, writing, and traveling the wine regions of the world, along with judging at competitions in North and South America, Europe, and Asia for the past 2 decades to keep on top of wine and trends in the global industry. So please join me this afternoon in welcoming Janet for her talk today about export.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome for coming out. As Debbie said, I basically have spent the past 2 decades of my life. Some of you were probably not born or very young when I made the transition from academia to wine. I was finishing a PhD at Concordia in Montreal on social demography, nothing to do with wine. But because I was never writing my dissertation, because I lived right between this great restaurant, which now has a Michelin star, and a New World wine shop, I was always like flitting between the two, and it took me a long time to finish my dissertation, so don't do that, a word of advice. But the thing that I did discover when I was starting to taste wine and learn about wine was that as an academic, you sort of look at the industry and the wine world from, well, maybe other people look at it from this perspective too, but I was very intrigued by wine, not only as a product, but the business of the industry. And I mean, I'm not that trained in winemaking or growing, but sort of, as Debbie was saying, the whole value chain and how it fits in. So I think those of you in the room are mostly students today studying at COVI. But one day, if you are winemakers, I think it's very important for winemakers to understand sort of the different sales channels, because you're going to be making wine for those sales channels. When you're a winery, you might own a winery, or you might just be the winemaker but sent out on the road to promote your wines. So I think it's always important to sort of have a basis and understand the export market and what it takes to actually compete globally. It's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but really when it comes down to it, it's not easy to sell wine in any channel. Whether in Ontario you're selling it through the monopoly to licensees, if you live in a country with a free market system, selling it to big supermarkets and restaurants and small stores. And as you know already, alcohol is like the most highly regulated commodity probably in the world. So it's very different from other export commodities, and I know a lot of people think, oh, you just have to find out about, you know, where you want to sell and how to ship your product, and then you send it off and boom, sale done, and it's over. But I mean, because it's so specialized, it's a value-added product, people are not buying it only on price, and they're not only buyers in another market or in this market, are looking at sort of how that product fits into the broader spectrum up against, for example, other Canadian wines or other international wines. Are they good value? How can they place them on a wine list? How can they sell them in a store? So I'm going to talk about some of those things. I'm going to talk about the department I work at to put it in context. And yes, I'm the Trade Commissioner for Wine, Beer and Spirits and Tourism. And yes, that sounds like an amazing job. And yes, it usually is an amazing job because I get to learn something new every single day. But I also work for government, so it is a real job, and I have to do a lot of things that most people in a bureaucracy do, and spend most of my time on email like everyone in the world today. But anyway, our department does have offices throughout the world, 178 right now. Embassies, consulates, high commissions, and we do a multiple array of things. A lot of it, I mean, we have a consular section, so if you get arrested in a country, our consular section will work with you on helping you get out of jail or notifying your family or whatever. But the section that I work in is the trade section of the department. And what we do there is, as Debbie mentioned, we work with Canadian companies who want to export. So we help prepare them for export markets. We gauge their level of export preparedness. If they're ready, if they're going to make it, if the markets that they're considering are going to be appropriate for the product mix that they have. We also work with people who want to invest in Canada if they want to. I mean, for the wine sector, it's quite limited at this point in time, but we have had foreign investors come and invest in the wine industry, both at wineries, but other products and services in the value chain for wine. So that's basically what we do. I, at headquarters, sort of, my role is to know the industry so that my colleagues overseas, when they identify opportunities, or if wineries come to me or some of my colleagues in Canada and want to find out information about, what kind of requirements are needed to export to Japan or Singapore or whatever, that they'll be able to provide that information. I also work very closely with the industry, with winery associations as well as individual wineries. And over the past I started my job in 2004, but since about 2008 or 9, we've been actively working with the industry to put together an export strategy so that we can focus on a few key markets, because as all of you know, the Canadian industry is quite small and our capacity is limited. A lot of wineries are domestically focused, but that being said, we do have across Canada over 100 wineries that are interested in exporting. At least half of those are active exporters. So we have been working with industry associations and my colleagues at the key target markets, the consulates, high commissions, and embassies, to put together trade promotion events where wineries attend for their products and they can meet with buyers, agents, distributors, media, and sommeliers. So this is just a bit more what the department does. But, and I'll talk a bit more about what we've been doing in terms of programs and initiatives with and for the industry. But You know, a lot of people often ask me, why would anyone want to export? Because it is complicated. It is, you have to be prepared to do it. But I think, and you can ask a lot of the wineries who do it, that, you know, it really builds their status and recognition internationally. And it gives them something at home that they can use when they go to market in London or Tokyo or New York. And it's not only about media accolades, although that is a big part of it, when you get a review in whatever, Decanter, New York Times, etc. You can use that as a marketing tool in your home market. But there's also, I think, you know, we become recognized as a serious wine producer when we're in a market where serious buyers and sommeliers are tasting our wine. So, so that's kind of, I think, a really important part of it, and why a lot of Canadian wineries do it. It's also a way of not putting all your eggs in one basket, because if you only sell through one sales channel, whether that's cellar door, the monopoly, licensee, whatever, things happen. I mean, if you've been paying attention to what's been happening in the United States and the already 25% tariff imposition by the Trump government on European wines, which is set to increase to 100%. This is, you know, a lot of small French, Italian, Spanish wineries that sell mainly to the US. They're going to have to start looking for other markets. And it's also going to have a huge impact on the US sort of distribution and wine business as well, because if European companies are not selling to the US, then agents and distributors are also not going to have anything to sell. So I don't know if you've been following, but it's interesting to read some of the testimonials that were put forth to the United States Trade Representation, and people have been saying, you know, we wanted to expand our distribution to California and New York State and hire 2 more people, but if you put the 100% tariffs in, we're not going to have wine to import from these countries, and we're not going to be hiring Americans to sell these products in the country. So I think export is also, it can be a very interesting means to bolster your winery's wine tourism strategy, as well as for the region. And I know a lot of wineries and regions want to be known internationally, and they're like, it's happening less so now, but when I started this 20 years ago, people were always saying, how come, you know, WSCT doesn't have that much about Canada? They still don't, but how come we're not written up in this publication? How come, you know, how come the world is not talking about us? Well, with the exception of ice wine, which has been exported for a long time, and I mean, that has really sort of built our global reputation to start with. But if people are not drinking ice wine, and if they haven't come to Canada to visit a wine region, chances are that they're not that familiar with our products and what we're doing. So by getting your products out there, getting them in the hands of distributors, buyers, writers in other markets, we have started to create a buzz. We've created a buzz with ice wine. I think now we're sort of in the second wave where people are starting to really see and focus on table wine as a serious proposition for the country. So if you're interested in, you know, a region or a winery having an export or having a wine tourism focus for your winery, it's really good to get a bit of wine out there so people can see it. And then I've done that myself. Wherever I've gone to a country and I see a wine, and it's like, or not when I've gone to a country, but when I've been here and been drinking wine, it's like, oh, wouldn't it be great to go there? and then you go there. But when you come back, you always have to reinforce the message, and to get those people sort of committed to your product, they have to be able to drink your wine once in a while, or else it just becomes a bit of a one-off kind of thing. In terms of an export strategy itself, I mean, there's all kinds of theories about export, and this is just kind of drilling it down to two basic things, but there's really, you can either have a differentiation strategy where you're positioning yourself and your products as special, rare, at a higher price point, premium price point, or you can have a cost leadership strategy where you have the volume and you have the cost and you're looking for a large market share. Most wineries in Canada are of the first, limited supply, higher price points. So with that in mind, you have to look at the kind of channels and the kind of markets that you want to get your products into. Are you ready to export? And as I said earlier, this is one of the things that the department does, and that I talk to wineries about all the time, because lots of people are interested, but they're not necessarily ready to export, and because it is so competitive. So you really have to know what you do well and focus on it. And it's, you know, I've sat in on, we've worked with industry and also hosted many webinars on export and marketing and branding. And the facilitators of the course, I remember one course, it was here, probably in this room, and the facilitator, who was from the US, asked all the wineries in the room, you know, if you had like your elevator pitch to give to me, why are you special, and why would I as a buyer buy your wine, or why would I write about your wine? So he asked everyone to write an example down, and almost everyone wrote down, we are a small family-focused winery, or family winery focused on quality and making only exceptional products. So this was like 30 or 40 wineries in the room. So that's not really a value proposition or a unique selling point, because there are no wineries in the world where, well, nobody comes out and says, oh yeah, I'm like not producing very good wine, I make lots of wine, and I just want to try to sell it at the highest price point that I can to whatever. So I think, you know, you have to be quite thoughtful about what you want to do as a winery, and what your story is. And look at the markets and sort of distributors and who you want to pursue in these markets. And chances are, and I'm speaking from the perspective, not from the perspective, from what I've seen of the Canadian wine industry, even our largest exporters, I mean, some of them are in, you know, quite a number of markets, but I'd say your average small to medium-sized winery, if you're in 5 or 6 markets or 10, I mean, that's already pretty good if you're allocating product in those markets. Because, as I said earlier, it's not just shipping wine and allocating product, but you actually have to go to market. You have to have like an export director, or it could be the winery owner or winemaker who has that as part of their portfolio. But you really have to work the market. You can't expect product just to be shipped and it sells itself. And you also have to factor that into your business plan and your yearly allocation, even if there are short crops, which is always a challenge. In places like Canada, because we do have short crops and we do have weather variation. And, you know, often if you decide that, okay, when you're in export, I'm not going to give you those 2-3 pallets or whatever you've allocated to that market and that distributor, they'll very quickly look for something else to fill that void. And when you want to go back, well, they've already found someone else. So So it's really about, you have to have a long-term vision, supply, you have to have someone who's doing this and committed to doing this. And when you start doing it, you have to be patient. And this is where what I've seen, you know, we've been doing events in the US, London mostly. We've done things in Hong Kong. But it takes several years for, and the industry also goes to Pro Wine every year, which is the world's biggest trade show in Germany, in Dusseldorf. And it takes several years to get into a market. And I think that's very important to realize, that you can't just show up to a trade show or a tasting and meet your distributor who's going to be your distributor that day, or even if you meet someone who becomes your distributor that day, you have to follow up with them, seal the deal, and then work to support this person in the market, because they are there to help you sell, but they need you to help them also with samples, tech sheets and all the things that they need to sell when you're not there. So again, just looking at where Canadian or anyone's wines would fit into the global market, I think you have to do like a broad scan, you know, style, price point, quality. I think one of the advantages we have in Canada, and I hope that people in wineries recognize it, that we actually don't have to go that far to see where Canadian wines fit in a global market, because we have a market that has a lot of import products in it. So we're already competing against other countries and imports or other imported products to Canada. So I think it's about benchmarking in wineries. Even if they're only selling in the domestic market, it's always a good idea to benchmark their products against what else is in the market. One thing that we've been seeing in talking to trade and media, both when we go abroad or when we bring people into the country, and I just left a group of 7 sommeliers, 6 of which were from the UK and 1 from Shanghai, who have been touring around Niagara all week tasting. They came to CCOVI. Belinda gave them a great tour. A lot of times, you know, people are tasting our wines, and I think some people, wineries might think that, oh, I have to give my best product, my reserve, my super reserve at the highest price point. But what we've been seeing is sometimes buyers, sommeliers, like wines at an entry level, especially for, you know, our cool climate wines, unoaked wines, just sort of pure, beautiful fruit from a cool climate region. So it's not always about high-end stuff, but it has to be fairly priced, because, and especially for a market like the UK, and it's always enlightening when I travel around with these groups or when I go there and talk to people in London, New York, probably Tokyo, other international markets. These people can buy anything they want at any price, because everyone wants to be in their market. And I think London is really everyone wants to be there. Everyone wants to have their wine on a Michelin-starred restaurant. Everyone wants to, you know, have their wine tasted by Jancis Robinson and Oz Clarke and all these people. So to get your wine on these restaurants, you really have to be able to offer a competitive and compelling price so that your wine can get there. And I think that's very important for a new region, and I've seen that not just for Canada, but other regions. You have to go in and offer a really good product at a good price ratio. So I think wineries also need to know how to pitch their product to the trade when they export, because most of the time you are working with the business element of the wine, so distributors, buyers, media. You're not talking to consumers, so you can't talk to them about how much you sell your wine at your cellar door, or, for example, you're a quality-driven, family-owned winery. I mean, yes, that's part of your story, but as I said earlier, everyone kind of says that, so you have to have a story and a pitch and talk to them like business people. I think it's also important to understand the concept of goodwill, so that when you're working with people that, you're often expected as a winery to send samples to potential agents, distributors, media. It might not result in a review, in a discussion about being taken on. But that's how the business is done, and I think you have to just sort of be patient and be persistent and follow up. So again, the whole thing about finding an agent or a distributor, I think, is really key. And I've read, I've read quite a few how to export guides, and a lot of them are sort of just generic export guides, and they talk a lot about tariff structures and which market has a free trade agreement and how to get a freight forwarder and eco terms of transport and all that stuff. And yeah, that's important stuff to know. But usually, most markets in the world, you have to have an agent or distributor representing you to even get your product in on the other end. And it's usually that person who will know all the stuff in the market and will usually, if you negotiate that kind of pricing with them, an ex-seller price, or they'll take over the shipping. So their role is really to guide you through that process to make sure that you have the proper documentation that you need to export. It's actually the number of documents, or what Canada requires as a country in terms of export documentation, is quite minimal. Actually, it's quite almost non-existent if you're a winery that has a business number, and you maybe need an export declaration. But most of the issues or the certifications and paperwork that's required by exporters is from the country to which you're exporting your product. So they're the ones who are going to want to see your certificate of analysis and certificate of origin and all these kinds of things. And some are less complicated than others, but it's really the agent that is there to guide you through that process. And it sometimes, I've heard from wineries who will call me up or send me an email saying, what do I need for this, and why is this not working in this market? And when I ask them if they have an agent, and they say yes, and I'm like, well, your agent really should be able to provide you with that kind of information, because they're in that market. And if they're a serious agent that's in the business of actually importing wine, they should know not only how to import wine, but also how your wine is going to make its way through the channels in that country. So that's, I think, if there's one takeaway, it's you really have to work with someone who knows the market and is going to be able to help you there and be your eyes and ears on the ground. Our department will be able to provide you with sort of, information when you're export ready and starting to decide on a plan, but our role is not to, get your products in and broker your products into the country. So then it becomes a B2B arrangement, and you have to, work with someone that you feel comfortable with and that you think is going to be a good fit for your product mix. In addition to getting products in market, I think you have to be present in the market. So whether that's attending trade shows, some events similar to what we've been organizing with our department. You need to do that. You have to research who's going to be there. I think it's important, especially if you don't have a distributor, if you're looking for one, what types of people are going to be at a trade show. Set up appointments to meet with them. Don't just stand at your booth and kind of, I mean, it can happen too, and a lot of companies have gotten distribution just by going to a trade show and talking to people who are interested in Canada or their products. So that does happen, but I think it's always recommended and always a good idea to be proactive and try to find out as much as you can about who will be there and set up appointments with them. Again, I've already said this, but once you do get an agent, you need to provide them with samples and text sheets so that they can go around and pour your wine in the market for somms and media and whatever. Make sure that, you know, I mean, I think it's less important overall for somms and buyers, depending on the market, about competition medals and media accolades. But if your channel in a market is selling through a retail chain, then medals probably mean something. If a wine is sitting on a shelf and consumers come in and see that it's won a medal at whatever competition. Again, if you're going to commit to export, you have to work the market and you have to go there often. You can't just seal the deal and sit back and expect all the magic to happen. I mean, export is, you know, even if you're not exporting and you sell your products through your cellar door or to the LCBO, I mean, you still have to, you don't have to work the market when you're selling cellar door, but you have to have staff in a tasting room. You have to have some kind of strategy to attract people to your cellar door to want to buy your products. You also have to have a strategy that will reinforce purchase, whether that's wine club or them coming back or events in different cities so that they can meet the winemakers, all the potential winemakers here who will be talking about your wines. And even if you're just selling through the LCBO, you have to have your sales staff who are working with the buyers, who are working with each of the stores, who are going in there and sampling with them. You know, you have to be prepared to pay for the promotional aspect that comes with selling wine. I think sometimes some wineries or some people, not just here, anywhere, might think, oh, it's so easy to sell through cellar door. And yes, you make the most money that way because you don't have to sell wholesale like you do when you sell to the LCBO or to export. And wholesale is usually around 50% of the retail price. So, and I'm not even going to talk further on that. That's a whole other discussion about markups and margin. But the reality of the global wine market is you sell your product at wholesale because the distributor who buys your product also then marks it up and makes a bit of money when they're selling it to either a restaurant or a retail chain, who then again, as you know, marks it up once it hits a restaurant wine list or is in a retail market. So you're looking at, you know, a $20 bottle of wine. You may sell it to a monopoly or it's different for licensees selling directly to restaurants in Ontario, but you may sell it to the LCBO or in an export market for half the price, usually maybe even less than half the price, so $8 instead of $20. And then by the time it gets to the market, it's, you know, duty paid by them. Freight is a very small cost, actually, when you look at the overall pricing and product mix. But then once it gets there, as I said, the importer distributor wants to make some money on it. They sell it to a restaurant. Restaurants often mark it up for 3+ sometimes times the amount that they buy it for. So yeah, it's you really have to prepare yourself for what you're in for. And I know I hope this is not sounding negative. It's meant to sound realistic, that it's very, and it's, you know, wine is a heavy regulated commodity and sector, but it's no different if you had a product, if you had orange juice or whatever, and you're selling it to Loblaws or Sobeys or whatever. I mean, if you're buying orange juice for $5, whatever it is, the supplier is selling it for, I think the margins are even less for food products. So they're probably getting like $1 out of the 5, and then when it makes its way through the chain. So that's just the reality of sort of retail and the business, but you need to know what to expect. So again, challenges, we're up against larger or small wineries or medium-sized wineries are up against larger producers, better established, smaller producers. Size is one thing, but I think export is also, if I can say, it's a bit of a state of mind, because there are lots of small producers all over the world that export. And anytime I travel or meet with a winery, the first thing I ask them is, how much do you produce, and, you know, where are you selling? And I've met wineries. I was recently in Croatia, and I met a woman who's a master of wine who now makes wine in Croatia. And like, I don't know, she makes like hardly any wine, like 1,000, 2,000 cases, but she's exporting to 6 countries, which is amazing. I mean, yes, she has, you know, connections and she's committed to that business model, but it's not impossible that you can't be a small winery and export if that's part of your business plan and what you want to do. I also remember when I was in New Zealand a few years back in Central Otago, and I was talking to a lot of the wineries there, and a lot of them were between 5,000 and 10,000 cases, and they had no cellar door, but I had made appointments to see them. And they don't sell through cellar door. They told me it's too much work, it's too expensive, and a lot of them sell either to the LCBO or to 1 or 2 sort of big suppliers in a place like the UK. They said it's super easy. We sell it, we have a couple of clients, we get paid within 30 days of our product arriving, and we don't have to have people coming to our cellar doors. So, you know, capacity is a thing when you want to expand. It's a bit of an issue, as I mentioned earlier, about cool climate challenges and constant allocations, but I don't think it's sort of the only limiting factor to if you want to export. If you want to export, and you can, you know, a lot of you will be familiar with some of the smaller wineries in Canada who are exporting, who are not big wineries, but they've made their name on export in an international market, and it's created a buzz, and people want to taste their wines in Canada. So I guess another, and I've talked a little bit about this, but another challenge is, you know, Canadian wines are relatively expensive. That's because we have super high labor costs. We have challenges related to production. There's land costs, less so in Ontario, but definitely in BC. I mean, some of the land there is selling for more than it is in Napa. So, and grape prices are high. So that's all going to end up being factored into the cost of a bottle of wine. Again, our wines are hand sell products, especially table wines, because we're not that well known for them. So you have to work with your agent who will pour the wine, talk about the wine, tell the story, hand sell the wine. And again, just have the resources, both financially and staff, to follow through. Identify the opportunities. Again, it's up to each business to decide what they want to do, if they want to do it, where they want to go. But what we've been seeing, my department, and with the industry, is that most companies who have focused on sort of, you know, premium product, niche market wines in markets with wine knowledgeable consumers like the UK, Hong Kong, certain cities in China, like Shanghai, for example. And what we're starting to see now is more interest from Northern Europe, the Nordic countries. And we're actually we've been working with the High Commission in Industry on a tasting in London at Canada House every year since 2010. And we're going back again in May, but this year, because everyone's been hearing about the Nordic countries, we're doing a bit of a pilot project. We're going to do a tasting in Helsinki and Oslo, and right now we have about over 50 wineries signed up for Canada House in London, but we have over 30 wineries signed up for both Helsinki and Oslo. So there's definitely interest, and that's the kind of market. They're small markets, but the monopoly apparently pays good money for products because they have a customer base that actually has disposable income and interest in New World wines and cool climate wines. So I think we have to look for markets that want cool climate wines. Other parts of China, again, as an example, I mean, they're really looking for big, full-bodied reds, and most of our wines are not like that. So that might not be the best market. The US, by and large, I mean, there's always exceptions. New York and Chicago and a few other markets favor and appreciate cool climate wines, but a lot don't and have grown up with big, bold Californian reds or heavily oaked Chardonnays. So if you as a winery are making sort of like, laser beam Riesling and and really sort of high-tone Pinot Noir, that's probably not the market for you because people are not going to appreciate your products. So you have to keep that in mind. Create ambassadors and evangelists, sommeliers, trade, media, who are going to talk about your products and help them sell through the channel. So, and again, link what you want to do to your plans for your winery in terms of wine tourism. So sort of some nuts and bolts stuff just to end. Support for export for wineries. So one of the big things from my department, the Trade Commissioner Service, is we do have a can export program for both associations and for small and medium-sized enterprises. We reimburse up to 75% of your eligible expenses, and this can be for things such as going to trade shows, hiring a consultant to put together a business plan for you, doing market research, looking at trademark issues and intellectual property things so that you can trademark your winery name, which is very important. So, because there have been wineries in a few markets who now want to go to that market, and there's another winery in the market that has the same name, so they can't sell their products under that name. So you have to put in an application form for a minimum of $20,000, which means you would have to match 25% of that, and up to a maximum of $99,000, almost $100,000. And up until recently, it wasn't open to wineries through my department. They had another program through Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, but that has sunset and it's now through the department. So if there are wineries out there, you can look at our website and find out more information on that. Other ways to support and get involved in export. My department, we have a program called the Canadian Wine Initiative. It is a program where wineries can sell to Canadian embassies, trade commissions, and consulates throughout the world. It's actually administered, well, I have a staff who administers it, but right now we have about 120 wineries and breweries and some cider producers and distilleries who have signed up for the program, and they basically sell to us. We consolidate all the products. Embassies can order from, like if they want to order from 100 companies across Canada, as long as they have a 3-case minimum per supplier, we consolidate it for them and send it off to them. So there's that, and we have a fair number of Ontario and other wineries doing that. We've also given export seminars and webinars and sort of things similar to this, so that industry and people who are interested to learn more can do that. I've mentioned the tastings we've been doing in a couple markets. Usually we don't only do a tabletop tasting, but either the day of or the day after or in advance, we'll do a webinar. We'll hire speakers in the market to talk to wineries about how to sell your wine, who are the key players, what are the challenges, some of the things that I've been talking about, but very specific to that market. Last year we did it in London. We had a distributor, a buyer for Selfridges, a sommelier, and I don't know, someone else. And it's very useful for the wineries because it's sort of a round table and they can ask them, you know, sort of real life practical examples, which they need to know. When we work with embassies on these tastings, we actually ship the wine as diplomatic shipments, which means that, I mean, they're all samples to begin with, but there's no duties or taxes levied on the product because they're samples that are sent. They're not commercial samples and not for commercial use. We've partnered with the industry to bring buyers into region, and the participant from Shanghai in this latest region was, we brought him in from Shanghai and have done that in the past. We also organized the first Canadian Wine Sommelier Championship of Greater China, in which we had our embassy and 5 consulates. We put together a sort of written test for sommeliers who wanted to compete, and the winner from each region came to Hong Kong and competed for a full day long session, as they would in other sommelier competitions, talking about Canadian wine, another taste, a food and wine matching, and then the winner got, actually we partnered, our department partnered with industry as well as Destination Canada, and the winner won a trip to British Columbia, Ontario, and Nova Scotia for about 2 weeks. So this is probably the longest anyone has ever been to all regions of Canada, and probably the only person in the world who has done this. And as a follow-up to that, we designed a Canadian wine certification course that we launched in Hong Kong last year, and we had about 30 people from Hong Kong and other parts of mainland China who came. And it was a full day long course, similar to what you can do either through, like New Zealand has one abroad, and Chile, and I think there's some offered through some WSET providers in Canada, where they spent the whole day in intensive learning about all the regions and tastings, and we had a food and wine matching thing at lunch, and then they wrote an exam at the end of the day and they got a Canadian wine certificate. So, and we will do that again, although it's a lot of work. Anyway, this is just, I forgot I put this slide in here about the Canadian Wine Initiative. So it was created in operation for quite some time already. One of the things, because it is kind of like export pricing, it's a good way for a winery who is interested in getting started in export, because we work with them on their pricing. The wines are used at sort of high profile events, high exposure events, and we also have great support from the industry, from the Wine Marketing Association of Ontario, British Columbia Wine Institute, and Taste of Nova Scotia, that helps us with some of the shipping costs, because as I said, we have to get all the wine from all across Canada to finally one central point before we send it out. So it's a bit of a matrix. Anyway, we've sent over 1,000 shipments since the fall of 2004, so it's definitely up and running. And this is more from the perspective of when this is on your website, that people can look at this, at some of the documentation that's required and some of the information that they might want to have when they're contemplating export or already doing export. So as I said, Canada itself doesn't actually impose a lot of regulations on wine. Wine is not a regulated commodity like some other products are in our country, but you really need to know when the wine is landing, wherever it's landing, what you need to have with that shipment so it's not sitting in port. If it does happen, then you can call our embassy or consulate and they'll work with you to get it through customs or try to solve whatever challenge has been happening there. So I think I was supposed to talk for 45 minutes and I went 5 minutes over, so I'm done.
Okay, so we've got some time for questions. Does anybody here physically have any questions for Jen? I'm going to start us off.
Okay.
Janet, so you've laid out all the different components of developing an export strategy and what you need on the ground to really get that rolling. What's a typical time frame? Let's say, you know, I'm a winery, I've never exported outside Canada before. You know, what's a realistic time frame to get a program off the ground?
Yeah, good question. I would say, based on what I've seen and heard, and I think that you need to allow 2 to 3 years before you can have a real formalized agreement with a distributor in the market and actually get, you know, you've sent them samples and they decide, yes, they want them. And by the time things get moving, yeah, probably 2 to 3 years.
And that also includes, you know, the time that if you're planning to go to country X, you know, you're putting wines in competitions and trying to build up a bit of a need for yourself in that country.
Yeah, you would be sort of doing that simultaneously if you've committed to going to wherever, Hong Kong or London, then it would probably be a good idea to enter a few regional competitions if, yeah. So yeah, it's not an overnight thing, and I often hear from wineries, you know, they'll say, oh, I really want to export, but I'm not going to be ready for 2 or 3 years, so I won't do anything now. And I get it. It's every business choice to do something, but I also would tell them something like this, that once you start 2 or 3 years from now, it might take you another 2 or 3 years to actually get into the market. So if you have some product in terms of samples and some time and finances to attend events, trade shows or whatever, start doing it now, because yeah, 2 to 3 years is sort of the average. Some people are lucky and it happens overnight, but you know, people win the lottery and their life changes too. So, Belinda?
Do you consolidate wines to be sent over to a wine competition?
No, but industry associations do that. Not to everyone, and I don't know which association is sending to which competition, but they do that. We don't.
You mentioned that certain regions and certain countries have a strong preference for, let's say, more cooler climate wines, and obviously we produce cooler climate wines here in Ontario. Is there a specific good resource for wine research for figuring that out, or is that something you're going to have?
Yeah, we can help you to some extent with that, but I mean, there's no sort of one thing that would say.
Yeah, you know, like, you know, there's like Nielsen and Cal.
Yeah, and wine. Yeah, so I mean, we can have access and look at things through Euromonitor and Data Monitor and, Wine Intelligence. And you can also through, not to make a pitch for them, but through Wine Australia, they actually have really great resources for their exporters. So they have really great market reports that anyone can buy on any market, and they tell you kind of consumer preferences and what certificates you need. And so if you're interested in exporting, wherever, to the UK or France or blah, 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 I mean, they would have an EU report, but they have country-specific reports. And we haven't bought them for a while, but they were not crazy expensive. So, but I think, rather than, I mean, if you're a winery and an exporter and are looking at the global market, I think first you have to kind of figure out, just by knowing, like reading stuff about the wine industry, right? And you can get a sense, read the drinks business and online stuff. And I subscribe to like a million things that come in every day, like those free web things. And I usually now just read the headlines and read the good stuff. But that'll give you kind of a sense of the overall market and sort of continents and different places to start at. And then when you're interested in a couple markets, then, talk to us or, purchase stuff on your own as well to really drill down. No business has time to start reading about like 50 countries and yeah.
The other question, you mentioned about different markets have different preferences, but like from your experience, how do you come to a market that's more acceptable or easier for exportations? Like, is it South America? Is it easier to export to there, or is it more regulation to export from London?
So South America, it's most of if they're not making wine, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, the other countries are buying wine from those countries. Brazil has like super stringent entry requirements. It's quite hard to export wine there. So South America, it's not only about getting wine into market, but as you said, it's preferences. The people there are drinking local wine or in the region. London it's a competitive market once you're there. It's one of the less challenging markets to actually sell wine, like from a shipping wine and exporting wine. Hong Kong has no duties or tariffs on wine, so it's quite easy. The rest of the EU it's not that complicated if you know what you're doing and get your stuff in. Complicated markets are the US because they have a 3-tier system where you have to sell to an importer who then sells to a distributor. Sometimes they can be one and the same, who then sells to a retailer or a restaurant. So that's the federal sort of infrastructure, but each state also has their own regulations about sort of their duties and taxes. There are states, I can't remember which one it is, but it actually has limits on the amount that a company can actually export into the state. In addition to state regulations, there are also county regulations. There are dry counties, so you can't sell through dry counties and whatever. So it's quite complicated. China is also the kind of other market that is very complicated. They require a lot of different export certification and sometimes change things without producers really knowing. I think it's also, China and other markets where people are not speaking the language are just challenging by nature of due to the fact that people don't speak the language. So, yeah, the EU not so bad, The US, let me qualify, it's a receptive market, certain parts, once you get it there, but you really have to be on your game to get stuff in the US and navigate your way through their regulatory system. Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of things about, like, you know, if you're thinking of India, they have some of the highest tariff structures in the world for wine, so that adds to the price of wine when it lands. And yeah, but Canada, I guess in general, is just right now, if I can summarize, and this is not a winery perspective, but what we've seen is, you know, there are a few wineries who have product and can sort of go a lot deeper and wider, but most of our wine is exported to the US, China, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, the UK, and then we have sort of pockets of, you know, people are doing stuff in Germany, and there's a bit in Switzerland, there's a growing market in some of the Scandinavian countries, but by and large, we don't really have, Singapore and Japan, but by and large, we don't really have people exporting anywhere in the Southern Hemisphere, like nowhere in South America, really not anywhere in Africa and Australia and New Zealand, not much happening there. I mean, we tend, you know, like I said earlier, people, you need to go where, what's that expression, fish where the fish swim or whatever. So it's pretty hard to go to a market that's already dominated by a domestic industry that sells a lot in its country, like Australia. New Zealand exports a lot, but yeah.
Just before we end the questions, are there any online questions? Okay. Just a reminder that all of our talks are live webinars. We do tape them after and post them on the website. So if there's some information here that you really want to access at a later date, give us about a week and we should have that posted up on the CCOVI website. So Janet, thank you very much for a really informative talk. Just a little token for CCOVI. So please, one more round of just a reminder that we're back here again on Monday next week, January 27th. Our speaker next week will be myself. I'm going to be talking a little bit about a local yeast that we isolated a few years ago that we've been characterizing under a lot of different fermentation conditions. It's got some interesting characteristics to it because it likes to consume acetic acid. So we're going to be looking at the application to ice wine, the passamento wine, sparkling wine, and some disease states of fruit coming into the winery. So I look forward to seeing you all next week. And for those online, please remember to tune in next Monday at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much.